Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming to this panel. I know that you came to this panel because of me, and so I really appreciate that because that makes it look really good that I had the best panel. Actually, all kidding aside, obviously it's because of the incredible women that are sitting in front of you. So it's my great pleasure to be able to host and chair this session of employers. Each of the people on the panel have been asked to look at the strategy that has been developed as is and to give a very high-level their high-level observations about things that need to be added into the strategy, things that may not work for them, or that would work for them, or that they've seen in their best practices as well. And we do have somebody who is taking notes. Megan Kelly is somewhere around here taking notes, and she will be reporting back to the larger group later on this afternoon. So it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce your panelists. So our first panelist is Ellen Austin, and she is from BDC. Sitting next to Ellen is Anna Karina Tabunyar from Sodexo. Next to Anna Karina is Jennifer Popsky. Popsky, sorry.
It's okay.
I knew that there wasn't an S. She's from TD Bank. And then besides Jennifer, we've got Elizabeth Kwan, who is from the Canadian Labour Congress. And then beside Elizabeth, we've got Marcia Ryu. And Marcia is the non-expert research advisor to this panel. So without further ado, I'm going to give it over to this incredible panel. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to go first. So hi, everyone. Hello, bonjour. My name is Ellen Austin, and I'm from the BDC, which is the Business Development Bank of Canada. And what we do is we support small and medium-sized entrepreneurs with advisory and financing options. And usually when I do these speeches, I'm really worried because no one's ever heard of us. So I'm very excited to see an actual BDC client in the audience. So thank you, Kevin. We have a few more, but they couldn't come today. So I'm on this panel today not as an expert and not as a business leader who's done something amazing to move forward the agenda of persons with disabilities. Rather, I'm here to share my story of the BDC journey so far in our workplace. And ours is not an exceptional story. Ours is one filled with good intentions, some great people, some pretty good initiatives, and I'm going to be very honest with some big challenges. So I'm not going to speak for all employers, but I will from time to time reference employers in general because I do have the privilege of meeting with small and medium-sized businesses and employers every day. So what I wanted to do was just set an employer mindset for you around persons with disabilities. So it's my belief, having met so many employers in Canada, that employers really do want to do the right thing. Having met many employers in Canada, I also know that we are a little risk adverse in our business, in our thought process. And so when you look at Canadian employers, what you really need to do is you need to demonstrate a bottom line value to their business. Because Canadian employers are lovely people, they're caring people, they're wonderful people, but they have a business to run. And it's okay that they focus on making money for their business. That really is the point. So that risk-adverse attitude often moves into different parts of their business. So with the strategy that we're talking about today and tomorrow, what I think is really critical for employers is to be able to leverage the statistics, the facts, and the cost benefits of tapping into the labor pool of persons with disabilities. The statistics that are presented need to be simple, they need to be factual, and they need to be relevant to business. And it doesn't need to be pages and pages of facts. What it needs to be are facts that are repeatable and that we can remember and reuse. And in particular, those facts need to be communicated to the executives, the CEOs of small, medium-sized, and large organizations as well. Then we need to translate those statistics into actions, measures, and cost benefit for tapping into the labor pool. Also associated with that risk is, I think, an employer fear that we will do something wrong. We're busy running our businesses, so we're worried that we won't comply with regulations, we won't know what our obligations are, we'll worry about violating privacy legislation, and to be honest, we're worried we don't have the expertise to offer accommodations, to follow up, to make sure we're doing the right thing. So I think for employers in general, the fear of the unknown is a big issue that we need to tackle within the strategy. At BDC, we have had that same experience, and because of that, what we've really tried to focus on is education and awareness. This is more than just the one-day initiatives where we have it's National Persons with Disabilities Day, let's celebrate, educate, and then the next day we move to something else. It's about more embedded, long-term, sustained education of our employees. And through this process, what we learned was it's great to reach out, talk to all of our employees, but the next day someone new joins. So what we want to do is take that education and awareness and embed it into our onboarding processes. Because what we're trying to do here is create a culture change, and you can't do that if you don't constantly educate new employees. The piece I wanted to talk about is partnerships, because I'm the head of diversity and inclusion for BDC, and I have 8 employee resource groups. And I have 2 minutes left, and I have 15 pages left to go. Okay, well, we're going to speed along. So what I'm going to tell you is I'm not an expert on disability. I never will be an expert on disability. What I am an expert on is the corporate culture of my organization. So what I look for is a partner who can actually help me to maneuver through the regulations, the education, the awareness. I need to know that an organization that I partner with, and in this case I will tell you, my partnership with CCRW has been amazing. For me, it's been like one-stop shop. They help me to understand what will suit our organization and how best we can leverage and move in the space. And I want to make sure, because I have just a couple minutes left, I could tell you all about BDC and all different things. I just maybe would like to make a small plug for a small business, and I know we're going to have some sessions on that later, but small businesses don't have a diversity and inclusion officer. They don't have an HR department often. And so for them to maneuver through this space is really difficult. And I think that's a group that we really, really need to address quickly. The #1 issue for small and medium-sized businesses in Canada is finding talent. So I would leave you with that. I'm happy to share more. It's always hard to go first, but now I can relax and learn from all of my colleagues on the panel. And if you have any questions later, I'm more than happy to answer. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Ellen. There's a lot of parallels in what you said in the organization that I work with. It's Sodexo Canada. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have heard of Sodexo? Oh, so good. Okay, so I've just bought myself an extra 30 seconds, so I'm not having to explain. But so Sodexo has been operating in Canada for about 30 years, and we're primarily business to business. However, there's a lot of similarities in a smaller business model because we've got what we call business units all across the country, so in rural, remote areas, in urban centers. And these are smaller units that they operate like small businesses. Wouldn't you say, Robert? Robert is my colleague from Sodexo, and he's what we call an operator. So his feet are on the ground, and he's busy day to day putting out fires, oftentimes trying to backfill people who have called in sick, people who've left. So getting talent, retaining talent is a big deal. So we are still trying to figure that out. We have certain general managers in certain areas who have developed really strong relationships with partners, so they know who to go to. And I think of 3 in particular who go to a resource for specifically people with disabilities. And their stories are phenomenal. They talk about retention, they talk about their safety records, they talk about their on-time performance. Stellar, stellar. But these are more the exception than the rule, which is what we're trying to overcome. You said something that was very interesting, and you said that D&I, diversity, inclusion, hiring people with disabilities, doesn't just come from one person. It's got to be part of the culture. So one of the advantages that I have at Sodexo was that I've come into this organization, it's been almost 2 years, but they've been on this journey for the last, I would say, 6 to 8 years, proactively, consciously hiring talent with disabilities. And so it's not a question of changing mindset because it's already there. It's actually physically finding the talent. So that's one of the issues that we would like this strategy to help address. I went through the strategy with some notes from my perspective as working with Sodexo, a national and global organization, but also as someone who's been working in communications for all of her career. So you talk about communications approach and giving tools for supervisors and managers and communicating about being able-bodied. What we're finding in terms of our communications approach, what seems to work is not so much the ableness, but it's the end result, the productivity, the output, the bottom line value. Safety is a big part of our culture. Safety first, 0 harm. So our studies have shown statistically, right across the board, not just in Canada, but globally, the business units that have a higher proportion of people with disabilities outperform the others. And so that's one of the key nuggets, key messaging in our communications. So it's not so much about being able-bodied, being a temporary condition, and inclusive universal design, because that doesn't really resonate with our operators. It's, what can you give me today? So if there's one thing that jumped out from a communications point of view, it was that aspect of the approach of communications. So that was one thing. That was the messaging. There was, I hope this is okay.
Yeah.
Because you told me to do my homework. The job she gave me was just go through it and then just take some notes and share your feelings. So I'm sharing. I hope this gives you some value. You talked about effective partnerships, Ellen. And this is so absolutely critical because we have in a few pockets, especially in the urban centers, some partnerships that are working and they're working well and they're well established. But in other areas, in Ottawa, I have colleagues who call me up. I don't work in HR. I have connections in the city, but it's really not my primary responsibility. So the fact is, they don't know who to go to at the local level for good talent. So that's a huge gap that we need to resolve. Another thing too is we're very proactive in trying to get talent fresh out of colleges and universities. And we're not at the level yet where we can offer an internship, a paid internship, or a stage or something of that nature. So bridging that gap between university and then actual work for job readiness would be hugely helpful for us. There was a lot of talk this morning about data measurement and accountability. At Sodexo, we measure everything. Everything. Every 2 years, we have an employee engagement survey. And consistently, we find that our #1 driver for employee engagement are our actions in diversity and inclusion, which includes the work that we do hiring people with disabilities. 2 minutes. 2 minutes, okay. So measurement and any data that you collect would be very, very helpful to us as well. And when you talk about creating disability confidence, what does that look like? How do you measure that? What's the gold standard? because there are lots of different organizations that offer a certification, but we don't know which are the more credible ones versus the others. So if there is some national thing that we could all maybe aspire to, then like let's create a national consistent global standard that's not piecemeal. And for us at Sodexo, these different certifications are a big deal for us because so winning top employer for young people, winning top employer for so many different awards, gender parity, these are a big deal for us because it helps us when we go out and try to recruit. So we find that new recruits actually come to us because of these certifications. I'm a perfect example. I never, ever had food and facilities management on my radar, but what drew me to Sodexo was their culture of inclusion and diversity and how they treat people with disabilities. So just to finish off, to have some kind of national certification for disability confidence, I think we would be all over that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I apologize, sorry, I'm not doing social media. I have a timer on here. That's the only thing I'm doing. So I'm just going to put that on, and hopefully I'll help the person there who's kindly timing for us. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be here. This is really cool. And partly I wanted to say thank you to CCRW when they sent the invitation, because CCRW and your partner agencies have done so much to support us at TD right now. It's amazing. I don't know if you've heard, we're actually in the process of setting up operations in New Brunswick. Net new area for us that's outside of branch world, and it's like 575 jobs. And how do you hire for that? Especially, and I've got PWD focus in my role. How do you find those communities? So fortunately, CCRW, you've already been tremendous in helping me find real hires for full-time roles and all of that, plus more support in Toronto. So when the request came in, I said yes, enough that it's TD Bank, yes, but I pretty much figured out every possible conceivable way to fit this into my schedule. So I am going to be concise, and I will ask for your help, because pretty much after this, I'm going to have to go back home toward work. So I need to have you share a message if you found something salient here, because I won't be able to share it. So we need to have like that team approach to say, I heard this idea and I found something of value to it, to keep it as part of the conversation for tomorrow, okay? So I need your help. On that note, my name's Jen, I'm with TD. I've been there 12 years. I'm into my second role. I used to be the bank's sign language interpreter. So I've been in the PWD space there, PWD, people with disabilities. We're so used to our acronyms at the bank. If you hear PWD, that's what I mean. I was there not for customers, but for employees, because we have quite a few deaf employees across the bank. So we're the only one actually that has a staff interpreter, so deaf employees can have more access, not just to access to information. It's not just like listening to a radio, but so deaf people can contribute their ideas. And from there, we've seen greater opportunities for promotion and real movement, because we don't want to just hire for jobs, we want to hire for careers. A lot of people with disabilities will tell me that they have been parked in their career. I'm not speaking about TD, but across an industry. I know this fantastic gentleman who made photocopies for 26 years. This is not his top level of capacity, but that's what it was deemed that he could do, and that's fine, he's got the job. That's not cool in my books. So how do we push inside companies like TD, and then outside to say, hiring isn't good enough, it's not good enough for our stats. How are we going to grow people? And how are we going to develop our managers to see and push our colleagues, and hopefully new managers and senior managers who happen to have disabilities as well? Because in my view, we create better products and services when we have a diverse group of people helping to create them. If I can, my role now is not sign language interpreter. I'm with talent acquisition, fancy word for recruiting. And my whole title is strategic sourcing partner, people with disabilities. So my entire job, it's a national focus for a federally regulated bank, to find great people with disabilities and help them in their application process and to find jobs within the bank. I'm not a job coach, I'm not a job developer. It's that person's career, but I want to make sure that they have an equal shot to be interviewed and hopefully hired into a role. And I'm one heck of an advocate and one heck of an ally. I don't recognize as having a disability myself, but with my work supporting, I was actually, in my last role there, the chair of the Accessibility Advisory Committee for the City of Guelph. I was there for the full 10 years and was 17 years in with sign language interpreting. I also have a son who has autism. I get it. And I want to see about ability, not barriers. And it's not about a weakness within the person. To me, it's a weakness that, or a barrier in the environment. And that can be changed, and we're going to take it away from the person. If I have a silly way I make a comparison for it, but if we change the environment or the tech, then we're taking away the barrier, and then you can shine. That's our focus. That's what I really push at. So with TD, for example, we have an assistive technologies lab, and we test hardware and software, and we have a catalog of over 300 items. So if you need a specific ergonomic keyboard, trust me, if it's tested and it works for us, you can get it, and we pay for it. We have a centrally funded workplace accommodation program. You don't pay, your business part of the bank doesn't even pay. It's centrally funded, it's free. And if it's something like JAWS, we can set you up. It's not perfect because sometimes our internal systems aren't all accessible. We have a fantastic JAWS user who would like to do job shadows, sometimes where he wants to go for a job shadow. We can't guarantee it because that system doesn't have JAWS availability to it. So there was talk about procurement of services. That's something I want us to do better, and if there's more conversation on a national level about making sure that we're testing services and systems that when we buy them, we can make sure they're as accessible as possible, then we don't have to worry about having the access and the exception and we can do this or 60% of a job and all that silliness. So I've got so much I'd love to tell you about. So with hiring people with disabilities, you're getting new outlook, new mindset, fresh ideas, and you're testing your systems before you put them out. And we've got one guy on our team who he helps test our accessibility for our mobile websites. And he has all the WCAG, WCAG expertise. It's awesome. He's also blind. It's like, yes, he's awesome because he's our best internal tester of those people who you need to use systems like this, your mobile phone. The hardest user, or the one who has the most difficulty using it, is someone who's low vision or blind or visually impaired, right? So now we've got internal QA before we even start. We don't have to apologize for customer experience and worry about the 2.0 edition. Got it down the first time. He's our best person to bring in. So I'm seeing the strengths in disability. We create better products and services. If you want, ask me questions about how to disclose, because it's how, not when or if, but it's how, and putting a positive spin on it and your strengths, because there are strengths in disabilities. We can talk about that, and I even get candidates who come up to me and say, and I love the candid conversation, I love the authenticity. Hi, this is what I like to do. My problem is ... And I get that. It's great to identify a problem. Help me and be a partner, and we'll figure out the solution, because you're also the leader. I want you to be a partner when you go out to your manager, and we're going to look at the problem, not the weakness in you, how we're going to make this better. Okay? You're right. You talked about reducing fear. Man, the more that we can do that, I always say it's a bit like an Oreo cookie. The top believes in it, grassroots believes in it. It's that mushy middle we got to work on. And it's just, and that's across the industry, across business, yes. Oh, I thought it. No, it's okay. I've got one more minute. But it's training against the fear. I spend a lot of my time, I feel like I'm introducing people to other people to say, this person has a disability. Here are all their strengths. I'd like to introduce you. People manager, you're worried about this, blah, blah, blah. Let me tell you, we can support you, and we're going to make sure that you have the skills that you need so that we can help our entire team succeed. And then we can talk about better productivity, reduced, all of those wonderful things. One last point, promoting for careers, not just jobs. Yeah? For this, Times New Roman, not readable. It's not accessible. And if there was a readable, I want to say this is definitely a government-focused one, but if we're talking really about accessibility, if there's an everyday language, clear language version of it, that would rock. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, wow.
Sorry, I got going.
No, it's great, it's great, it's great. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Kwan. I'm from the Canadian Labour Congress, and the Congress is like I guess, a national level of organization that represents labor across, unions across Canada. We basically represent 3 million workers, we work hard to represent them. So unions represent workers, like I said. We also provide bargaining power to workers, which means that as opposed to, a worker trying to make their own way as an individual, navigating through the workplace, the work world, behind a union, we actually collectively promote workers' interests as well as, anything that can promote their well-beings. In this case, in this persons living or workers with disabilities, we both work with workers through our committees as well as we, in our collective bargaining, we actually bring that issue of accommodation of rights to the table. So that's really glowing, because we all like to glow about who we work for. But, I want to say one thing. It's impressive, because I'm supposed to comment on them. It's impressive that we have people, we have employers who have shown leadership, commitment, some innovation, and it's great. However, there are some employers that are not quite there yet, for all different reasons. And I want to say this, some unions are really good at it, and some also are not quite there yet. So it's not like everyone is, on one end or the other, and so what I want to say is this. It is very, very important that we have a national strategy, the Canadian Strategy on Disability and Work. Employment was the #1 issue that was identified across this country in the consultations leading up to the Accessible Canada Act. #1. It even shocked the people who were organizing the consultations, because they didn't think that it would be #1, but it is. So we really know that that is a priority. We've heard it from people. Now, when I talk about different parts, and employers, there are some who do better, unions, some who do better, and then there are those who don't. One of the things I want to promote as part of this strategy is partnership and collaboration. In political lingo, it's called building a bigger tent. We have our tent now, and we have the people who are in the tent. We need to expand that tent. We need to invite other people into that tent so that we can work together in partnerships. And this means working across our silos. Unions and employers are always seen as opposing ends. Personally, I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone. I like to learn from everyone, and I like to see where we can work together. That's building a bigger tent, In this room, I'm sure that we share more than we don't share. So how can we build a bigger tent? That is about partnership and collaboration, working across silos. And that means that, for instance, in my world, with the Canadian Labour Congress, I look for opportunities. One of the opportunities in partnership is with academic, with funding under SHRC and under the Canadian Institute of Health, with academics who are looking at projects that look at injured workers, return to work, working with employers and working with unions and working with workers. That's bringing it all together in partnership and making something big, making something new. The other thing that I'd like to stress is this big, complicated, word, intersectionality. What does that mean? That means that I am sitting here in front of you. I am a racialized person. I'm a union worker. Do I have a disability? Sure. What is my gender identity? All of us, each of us sitting in this room, have a different makeup. Intersectionality just means that we talk about more than one aspect of who you are. That's all it is. But in the work that has been done historically, it's easier to look at just one aspect instead of saying, oh, is there another aspect? We all know that women with disabilities Well, first of all, they don't have they don't have great employment opportunities. But when they do have a job, they make so much less. And that is a difference, and that is the intersection between gender and their disability. So I would implore you to, not just in just data. This is not just about data. This is about how you do work, how you consider, how you look at clients, how you look at new business. This is about if you can see the many aspects of someone that comes together and you want to expand your business, this is the way to go. Figure out where these things intersect. The last thing I'd like to say is that I looked through the strategy, and one thing really jumps out at me that I hope that will be in the strategy, and that is the inclusion of policy. The development of policy, the time is now, because we have legislation, we have regulations, we have different policies. What we have is the new C81, the Accessible Canada Act. We have employment equity. We have, the government willing to put actions into gender-based analysis. We have a motion right now before a standing committee on episodic disabilities. We need to make sure that these pieces of legislation, regulations, and policy do not act against each other. We need to make sure that they're aligned, that they're coherent, and that they're comprehensive. Because if not, what happens is that it trickles down to programs and services. It trickles down to someone who has to go and apply for CPPD under a different set of criteria, who can't qualify for the disability tax credit because it's a different set of criteria to define disability. This is the mess that comes from non-coherent policy and legislation. We need to get it right at the base that guides and directs everything else that comes from it. Thank you.
It's a spectacular panel. It's great. If we could just put it all together, we'd have the solutions. I just want to look, there are a bunch of ways of approaching a national strategy. And we know them all in Canada because we can obfuscate forever here. The first one is an issue-by-issue approach. I call it the shrapnel strategy. Like we grab an issue and we're all off in that direction. The second one is priorities. Priorities set department to department. Guess what? Do we see it? The pillar approach, I call that, where we've got all these departments doing something different. They each have determined a different priority. The third is to improve what we have at the moment. I call that one the mousetrap approach. Just build a better mousetrap and all the problems will be solved immediately. The fourth one is building on historical services. That I call a layering approach. So we just keep putting more and more and more on top. It's like an archaeological experiment. And finally, the specialist policy approach, which is really a kind of segregation approach, and that may be where we are now. We've got lots of specialists in different areas who all are providing us with the brilliance of where to go. So we have all these. I think a national strategy is absolutely vital. I just hope we could jettison all of these previous ways of coming up with a national strategy, which have all been very common in this country. I am completely in agreement with my colleagues on this panel. I think there's lots of things that we really can learn if we stop thinking in the way that we're thinking right now. We have a tendency, and I learned this as a very cold lesson in India, Nepal, and Bangladesh, where I've been working for 6 years, getting jobs for people with disabilities, and we've been able to get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of jobs. But we have certainly no policy base on which we're doing this, because there is no policy base in these countries. I was naive 7 years ago. Now, I have to say I was naive, but I also was the person who wrote the paper for the Abella Commission on Employment Equity and Disability, which was in the early 80s. So this is not a new area. This is just one that it's taken us a long time to move towards. And the employment equity is still, I think, a single most novel idea that's come out of Canada in terms of employment. But for some reason, we seem to have to reinvent it every couple of years. But if, you can tell, you get a little jaded when you get really old. So what happened? I went off. I read everything there was to read about employing people with disabilities. I looked at all of the international development that was taking place around the world. And what did it tell me? It told me I should concentrate on people with disabilities. Well, so what do? You do a job readiness training. I'm still hoping I get one before I retire. They'll teach you how to do resumes until you're so discouraged and think you're such a fool that you shouldn't apply for anything because you failed after having 3 chances at writing resumes, or 3 workshops on writing resumes. We have job fairs. We have all of these things. And I realized none of them were working. What's the missing component? These people. It's the employers. We need to switch from the supply side concentration to the demand side concentration. Until we do that, all of our strategies and policies are not going to work. It just won't happen. It's employers who have the jobs. It doesn't matter whether it's government. It doesn't matter whether it's private industry, as you people have talked about. It doesn't matter if it's NGOs. It's about what is it you need to fill in your job sector. And once we know that, then we find out the skills of people with disabilities. Pretty smart, then we match. It's not rocket science. And this is what you're talking about in the work you're doing now. You're looking at how is the best way to make the best match. The disability is totally irrelevant. It doesn't matter in the least. And we're still out there saying, got to train these people, got to train these people. Well, we don't have to train anyone. Figure out what the skill is and work with the skill. And we've seen it and it happens. And I think that's what's nice about your job, your strategy. I think it's starting to move towards that approach. Sure, it's great to have policies. We need employment equity. We need job accommodation. We need all those things. But when I talk to employers, they say to me, gee, Marcy, it's really cool, but we have no idea what you people are all talking about. Because the business case that you're presenting is nonsense. It isn't about us. Well, you keep telling us what business case we should have. If we don't make money, we're fired. This is simple as that. If you don't make money, we're fired. Our board is not going to sit around and wait for you to be nice to people because your job is to make money. I know it's rough, but that's the reality. And until we start to recognize that, our business case is not having a major impact. So we have to listen to employers. It's absolutely vital. We need to look at some of the other issues. No more pillars. This is also about poverty. Let's get on with addressing poverty. There's no point in having a poverty strategy here, an employment strategy here. We need one strategy that deals with all of these, and you can throw education into that too. I know we have a complicated system. My PhD's in law. I know that federal provincial is pretty horrendous. But
Deal with that later.
For businesses, even worse. But, you know, we need to look at poverty. We need to look at intersectionality. It's important to look at it. It's not about disability. It's about who has a barrier to getting a job. So we're looking at a much bigger issue than disability. We're looking at who doesn't get a job. Then we need to think about the labor market, which is completely part of this. And if we're going to do the labor market, we need to do labor market analysis sector by sector to figure out where those jobs are. If we want to think about the future, yes, we should be thinking about what should we be training people to do. Not just people with disabilities, but generally. I mean, look what happened last week. We lost GM, is that right? Mm-hmm. We lost GM because we didn't think in advance that that was going to happen. Why is it that we can have major strategies and we don't know in advance that these things are going to happen, and we all act like it's just amazing. It's all anyone's been talking about for 5 years is that the cars are going to change. We're not even going to get in them. Well, I guess we're going to get in them. We're just not going to drive them. That's good for somebody like me because I fall asleep in cars. So it's much better if I'm not driving.
Okay, tell us when you're on the road.
Exactly. So, you know, we can do this kind of stuff. We can shift to the demand side from the supply side. We can understand the business case of employers, not the business case of our community. It's a totally new way of thinking about this. We need to give a legitimate place to the employer's role. They've got the jobs. They're the ones sitting on the jobs. So while we're telling people how to write resumes and go to job fairs and how we can push into the employer, we need to just listen to the employer sometimes. And that's how we've been able to find jobs. The business case is not about our desire. That isn't how business works. And in fact, it's not even how government works, and it's sure as heck not how DPOs work, because you need somebody in the job. The biggest thing we've heard is something that I just heard repeated on this panel several times, which is that employers might want to do something, but they don't know how to find the people. We're all closeted over here. They're over there trying to run a business. We need to support people, and we need to support the employer. And how do we support the employer? We support the employer by finding the person who's going to fill the skill need that they have. They know what they need. Let's find the person. Every person with a disability has a skill. We just need to make sure it's going into the right position. And then to support employers so that if it doesn't work out, we can figure out another way. We shouldn't be leaving people abandoned. Thanks very much.
See, the best panel. So what we're going to
Whose
do...
definition?
By my definition. What we're going to do now, and this is what we're going, you'll see this throughout the conference, we're going to have, we're just going to let the panelists exchange some thoughts that they've had of each other, of each other's presentations, if there is any. And then we're going to, maybe we'll do that we'll give that maybe 5 or 10 minutes or something like that. And then we'll flip it over to you for any questions, and we'll get you involved. And because this room is kind of stuffy and it's a little bit hot. So we'll make sure everybody's involved. So I'll just pass it over. Anybody have any?
I do.
Go ahead.
Mike?
Anna,
I absolutely loved, Elizabeth, what you said about making a bigger tent. And it dovetailed beautifully into what you were saying, shifting from supply to demand. Because I'll give you a perfect concrete example. In our business, corporate responsibility is not like out here and the business is here. It doesn't work like that. So within corporate responsibility, we have we have a whole bunch of initiatives, including sustainability and our work in hiring people with disabilities, and that's anchored right into our core business because we see the business results as a result of it. So like you said, it's not about disability. It's taking the talent, funneling it so that we do better, and then we show value to our clients, and that has become our business differentiator.
Excellent. Thank you. Go ahead.
If I could.
Yeah.
I loved your idea. When we're talking about collaboration and partnership, absolutely. I want to know where people are. And that's the biggest thing. I've been in this role for just 6 months, actually, as of today. Yay. But for me, like, that's where CCRW has been really, really helpful because you've got this massive network. But otherwise, for me, I don't know if you're familiar with 211. There's 211 Ontario and .ca in Toronto and everything. That's one way to find PWD agencies. If you are not on there, get yourself on there, please. But otherwise, I kind of feel like what I really want to do is go into a mall and find out all of the places in one go, or at least have access to that, versus going to this part of town, to this part of town. And everybody said, I have an idea, I'm going to set up a shop, but I don't know where you are. And I want to support you, I just don't know where you are. And I'd love to talk about what we're looking for to help you support your clients I say candidates, clients, so that we can make it successful from the outset. Like the vignette that was shared over lunch of that woman getting the horrible advice in Thunder Bay about not disclosing. Oh, I wanted to go find her and give her a hug because she was given bad advice at many turns. It's how you can share your story, and this is where I go about how you disclose, being part of the solution. I remember a lot of people when I talk to candidates, they're saying, I never knew I could say it that way. Like, yeah, this is great, because recruiters are nervous because they're scared they're going to screw up with saying something wrong, so then they don't ask. We're also not actually supposed to ask what workplace accommodations you have during the interview process, because then we want to avoid any opportunity to be prejudicial. If you want to disclose during the interview for your workplace accommodation, your recruiter might actually say, no, it's okay, I don't want to know, which isn't a great experience. We need to follow it up and say, this is why. We don't want to be prejudicial, we're happy to support, and here's our great program. But knowing that, knowing how to share, knowing that to say, I would be great in a role, I would like to let you know some short breaks so that I can either walk or sit within each hour. Now I've got a strategy that I can work with. Sure, that's easy. So I work with candidates so that they can position it well when they go to the interview, because I can't hire. The best I can do is hopefully whisper in the ear of the interpreter to say that the interviewer, that they're great, and hopefully that candidate will shine on their own. But you're right, it's working, I want to find you. And I'll work with the agencies, I actually did with New Brunswick, to say, this is what I'm looking for in a resume. Not me in particular, but this is what the recruiters are used to seeing in a resume. Had a great guy, his resume said painter. Like, is that buildings or art or inside of houses? I don't know. So how to pitch it and letting know where you stood out, that you're a good person, that kind of stuff. This helps me to promote you. So anyway.
I had one comment. I really liked your comment around a career, not a job. And I think one big piece of education for employers is, I think for a vast majority, when we think about we're going to hire someone with a disability, we think about entry level. And why aren't we thinking about filling that VP role in finance or the director's role in communication? And I think, and I hope in the strategy, we make sure very clear that the talent is multi-level through the organization and not just about entry level.
Thank you.
Well, actually, the only thing that I actually forgot to say was that if you're looking for people, apparently there are 645,000 potential workers with disabilities out there.
And they're there. I just want to say one thing. One of the things we've discovered in the work I'm doing is that there's a competitive element to this, and the banks know this. The banks, you know, it's part of the business case. People will compete with each other. As soon as they see another bank has people with disabilities, they'll be out there recruiting people with disabilities. We see it all the time. We had an interesting experience in India where the Lemon Tree Hotel is a great big chain hotel. It's huge. It's been hiring a lot of people with disabilities, especially as service workers. And interestingly, we got a call about 6 or 8 months ago saying, we can't continue to compete with Lemon Tree without people with disabilities. Oh, I said, can we help you? You can imagine. But this is going on. As soon as we get people into the labor market and people see that it's good business, all the other competitors are going to be in there. But we got to go one by one initially.
Excellent. And share the story.
Yep.
And
the big
social media, and share the
Yeah.
story, and not inspiration. Forget the inspiration. I don't care. Okay, one, it's not even the bank. Deloitte, somebody from there was talking about this awesome recruiter who they have in there now. Recruiting for executives, love it. And this especially why? Because the recruiter's blind. Because now I don't care what fancy dress or a suit you came in with, doesn't matter. I don't care about the $400 watch you have on your wrist, doesn't matter. It also, and the person from Deloitte was telling this at a panel, so I'm guessing it's public enough. But she was saying it's great too, because the leader, how they adjust to that immediate situation, not knowing that the recruiter is blind walking in. Right away you're seeing, what is their unconscious bias? What is their attitude towards people with disabilities? How open-minded are they? You can skip 4 hours of interviews and get it in the first 10 seconds. Pretty friggin' cool. Yep. And like they're seeing this like, yeah, let's challenge this. And now I had to, there was somebody else who I was trying to recruit into TD, and Deloitte was trying to take him. I'm like, no, don't do it. I want you to be my guy for that. So it's become a competitive thing, and you're seeing the assets of having somebody in who's got a different viewpoint. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. I think that we might want to turn it over. You ready for questions? Yeah? So, oh, wow. Okay, great.
Cool.
So are you able to run around with the mics, or do you want me to, you know what, I'll do that. Or Emile will do that. Emile will do that. Emile will run around with the mics. Thank you. Okay, so, yeah, John, I saw you first. I don't know why.
Line of sight, I think. Anyway, I had the opportunity a few years ago to do a welcome package for some OECD experts that came over to Canada to study our system. And when they went back, I said, what's really different about Canada? They said some good things about Canada, and I said, well, where are we behind? And they said, special needs kids. Said, so you have all these kids with disabilities, and they pointed out to us that in Northern Europe, especially in Holland, for example, the job coaches are going in and talking to parents and into the schools when kids are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, saying, here's a disability, here's our labor force needs of the future. Let's start to have some dedicated training and direction going in that direction so that when people are actually graduating, they'd be more job ready. I was just wondering what each of you thought about, or whoever wants to take the question.
Does anybody want to answer that or comment?
Sorry, about providing job training?
I think getting early
Oh,
intervention.
absolutely.
From what I hear, John, what I think you're saying is about early intervention. So it's about getting people ready early for understanding what the labor market is, and understanding that the labor market is very disruptive now, of course. But that what is the labor market? You know, being able to predict it to a certain extent, but also to destigmatize, I think, is the other thing that you're saying, John, is, and we see this at CCRW all the time, is the overprotectiveness of the children who have disabilities because their parents aren't aware of their potential. And so then it's a very systemic view on disability. So do you have any?
I have lots of opinions. I have my son, he's 13 now, he was diagnosed when he was 3. I feel, hopefully, I've been a better parent to him because actually of the deaf community. And I learned so much about having a different perspective and a different skill set and the strengths within that. And he's a 3D visual learner, and sign is beautiful because it's 3D and visual. And the deaf community would always say, you may need to label me with a disability so I can get this service, but I don't have a disability, and I use capital D deaf, and I'm proud to be deaf, thank you. So that's been ingrained in me for his whole life, and I've been continually thinking of my son, thinking, you need to know what your strengths are, own them, getting parents to see that. I remember I was interpreting it was a teacher's ed class, and they were actually talking about this professional teacher of future teachers was saying, they were talking about IEPs, individual education plans. And I was, that's when I had to mask, as we say with the interpreter, just don't show anything, because they were saying, be prepared, because parents will probably cry, and it'll be a sad day. I'm like, are you friggin' kidding me, lady? So like I said, my opinions are on this. But speaking to the strengths, because my son is a 3D visual learner, I keep telling him that all the time, because he's gonna have to be his biggest advocate. I can't be there all the time. I can also be his biggest barrier if I'm saying, don't do that, sweetie, sit over here. I have to keep teaching him and expanding his world and him being his biggest advocate. The more we teach the parents and teachers around IEPs, not to say how we accommodate. IEP to me just means you're getting away from a factory model. To say there's one way to teach, but now we're saying now we have flexibility. Okay, now we can have the kids show us the best way to show that they have the information. So you're right. So the school not seeing it as a weakness or a burden. I know they're, like, half my family are teachers. They're burdened with so much, not burdened with kids, the responsibility, the number of kids, the number of IEPs, the number of struggling situations, and not enough support. I get it. How are they working with the parents? How are the parents being part of Team Kid, whoever that is? My son is Tom. I say we're all part of Team Tom. I'm going to be there. And I'm going to work on his life lessons so that way he can talk to his strengths and know them deep down to his core, because we're all going to go through those times where we're always told we're lesser than. We need that to be stronger than ever. And then working on the job skills so that you can show that on a resume and tell that in an interview, because job skills and interview skills are very different things.
Great, thank you. Thank you. I think we have another question.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Julie Caldwell, and I'm from Carleton University. I'm here representing the David C. Onley Initiative for Employment and Enterprise Development for Students with Disabilities, really long name. But what we're doing is we're looking at post-secondary students, Algonquin, Ottawa U, Carleton, and La Cité, and we're trying to help eliminate the gap between when they graduate and finding meaningful career and employment. And just today we were meeting with a media company that we've hired to help us with our campaign for what we're doing. And one of the pieces that came up was around, as we were brainstorming a little bit, the inflexibility of the interview process. So I'm wondering, from an employer perspective, how open are we, and are we even ready to look at changing the policies and processes that come from how we hire? Because what we're seeing is that employers are afraid to deviate from process because we have to track and be consistent in the questions we're asking, but many of the people we're trying to provide valuable opportunities to are not able to perform or demonstrate their skill and ability in that constrained process and format. So I just wanted to get your input on that.
I'll just speak briefly. I think there's a bit of a debate right now in the human resource world. We worked so hard and so long to automate everything that we kind of forgot about the human part. And I know that there are organizations now moving away from automated resumes and AI sorting and things like that, because what you do lose is the personal connection. At BDC, we're big advocates of meet and greet. You know what? There's nothing more terrifying for anyone than going to an interview, okay? But when you go to a meet and greet, you get to talk to different people from the company, you get a sense of the culture, they get a chance to talk to you one-on-one, and I find sometimes that's probably the very best interview. The rest will come, and you can find out about skills and things like that, but I think sometimes we're a little less human than we are resource-based, and I think that pendulum's starting to change back because we're not capturing everyone in that pool.
If I could just add something too. So several months ago, I posted a position for a communications intern, preferably a journalism grad. So I had a specific skill set that I was looking for. And I saw how our HR recruiters did it, the standard way. I tossed it out the window. There were just too many barriers. And so I just wrote plain language. Do you want to come and work for a progressive organization that has this, this, and this? You'll be doing A, B, and C, working on these exciting files in Indigenous relations, sustainability. And at the very bottom, in caps, I wrote, let me know if you need any accommodations or flexibility for the interview. Nice. I mean, it was so simple. It was low tech, and it was plain language. And I got a ton of interviews. I mean, I got a ton of, the response was really good.
Thank you.
So it was plain language.
Marcia, do you have a?
Well, it's sort of interesting because I think the two questions that were just asked are very similar.
Yeah.
They're both questions about how do we individualize some of what we do. Our problem in schools is that we're not teaching teachers good pedagogical theory, and I'm not criticizing them for this, good pedagogical theory so that people learn at those very early ages. We also need to look at flexible hiring practices, but in a sense, it's the same question. We've got such a rigid system everywhere, or so many rigid elements of the system, that we're not moving towards recognizing that if we want diversity, we're going to have to do something differently. We're going to have to change the way we teach. The way we teach, and we can only do that by changing the teachers, not by changing the students. And the same thing as you're pointing out, and a lovely example of how we do a different kind of hiring process. but we need to think in a different way. It's not about disability. It's about a pretty flawed education system and a flawed hiring system. But the employers are recognizing that.
Thank you. I see Mark has the microphone, and I know that, over here first, sorry.
My name's Carl Crevar. I'm with the Canadian Injured Workers Alliance and also the Ontario Network of Injured Workers Groups. Let me just say congratulations to the panel. I know it's tough to sit up there and talk about these issues, and I'm very glad to be here. I was here last year. I'm going to come at it from a little different perspective. I heard some comments that I've experienced before. The issue I believe Elizabeth brought up is, what do people with disabilities want? They want to go to work. They want to go to work. I heard that over 30 years ago. They want to go to work and have the opportunity. I know I had attended a roundtable discussion on pay equity of people with disabilities, and I had the opportunity to present to employers and make that presentation, and the employer said, "You're right." But there was one thing that I had mentioned, that there's a component in there of enforcing that. And after the discussion with the employers, they said, "Well, we agree with you, but why the enforcement?" I says, "Because we've raised this issue for over 30 years, and you haven't done anything." So it's not uncommon to hear what is happening. We are in Ontario. What I see, I'm glad we're moving forward. I know it's a slow process, and it's going to be very hard. Question I've always had, because of my union background, is that we as a race must understand something. The reality of getting people back to work. There's a reality that says out there, if you have a disability with the employers community, if you have a disability, it's a liability. The fear of liability, of hiring someone with a disability. That's the fear, and I think that's an area that we have to talk to employers about. You don't have to be afraid. If here's a person that's qualified, hire them. You don't have to be afraid of a liability. Research has shown, by hiring people with disabilities, they are better workers, they're more conscious, they're more timely. So why wouldn't you hire someone in that category? I think that's a positive step forward. In Ontario, we're dealing with, there's a research program, process that we're working on right now, and it's people with severe injuries. 40 to 50% of those with permanent impairments are living in poverty or below. That's problematic, and that's something we're dealing with in Ontario, and I know it's happening in other provinces as well. And that's something that has to be addressed. When we understand that we're all human beings and give us all an equal opportunity, that's when we'll be able to move forward. What we don't see, one of the major barriers, we've had discussions, that's something else we have to address, is the provincial governments. I'll give you an example of Ontario, because I live in Ontario. The recent announcement is to get rid of the guaranteed income supplement. That hurts people with disabilities. And attacking the ODSP, the Ontario Disability Program, the support program. That's going to hurt. And until we get governments and employers together and talk to them about these issues, these very concerned issues, it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time. There's been a lot of research that I've read. I know some of Emil's work and some of the other researchers that have done work. I listen to, and talk to people with disabilities. The question I ask, I'm not going to be here and tell you what's good for you. You tell me what's good for you. They have to be involved directly in what they need in this province. So again, I'm looking forward to moving forward to opening doors for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I leaned over to Ellen because the first part of your question, I think, around policy is very important. And as we talked about on the panel earlier this morning, we really are we're looking at this as a voluntary strategy because we need buy-in, but and we want partnerships around this. And so I know BDC has just come out with a stat, and I've asked Ellen to share it because I think that this is why employers will be involved with this type of a movement. So
Yeah, so this is a small plug for BDC. But we did do a labor shortage study recently, and in our study, we determined that 40% of Canadian small and medium-sized entrepreneurs and businesses right now have difficulty finding talent, and that will only accelerate over time. So I think it will become less of a why aren't people doing it? And we talked earlier about the competitiveness. I think some industries are already seeing that. I think you'll see an automatic shift. I think though, to be really successful, we shouldn't be reaching out when there's a crisis. We need to be reaching out now to build sustainability and to create environments that will flourish rather than being reactive when there are no more labor pools for us to tap. So I'd encourage you to have a look at the study. It's quite extensive. It actually paints a picture that a lot of entrepreneurs, after we presented it, walked out going, oh my gosh, where am I going to go and how am I going to find talent?
Anybody else on the panel? We can move to the next question. Thank you very much. Mark and, okay, Mark?
I'm Mark White. I'm with Work Wellness and Disability Prevention, based in Vancouver. And we're sort of an academic and community partner group that's looking at how do we fast track research into training policy and practice. One of the things that I was interested in is actually the greatest potential group of people with disabilities are people that are already employed. And so I'm concerned about the disconnection when we think about the strategy of how many, and Yasmin mentioned it first thing this morning, how do we treat every employee in a manner that they can best utilize their skills? And I'm wondering how within your organization, are you able to communicate with HR and transfer the benefits that you're seeing through your programs across upwards through your others? And can that have an impact on how do we retain people with chronic health and episodic conditions, given that we have an aging population?
Who wants to tackle that one? Go ahead, Anna Karina.
I can speak on two levels. Somebody with lived experience who was on the other end. So as an employee who acquired a disability and then going in trying to reintegrate after 2 years on disability and realizing that the workplace was not set up for people with any kind of anything. The culture wasn't there. Even though they talked a good talk, we want you, tell us what you need. But there was nobody with any sort of visible disability or anybody who ever came back off of a stress leave who actually talked about it. So I know that reality. So coming to another environment where it's openly talked about. So I'll tell you, globally at Sodexo, there's a International Day of Persons with Disabilities is a big deal. It's really big, so big that there is a team in Europe that creates resources for all of our sites. If it's posters, if it's videos, if it's key messaging, helplines, local resources in the different countries around the world. And this year, it happens to be, the focus is on mental wellness because there's a strong correlation between a mentally healthy workplace and safety. So mental wellness globally is a huge deal. So when you have that kind of culture, if I were to have a relapse, I would not feel stigmatized. I would feel completely open to say, listen, here's what I need. And without fear that it's going to halt my career or that I will be shunned or whatever. But it's really a cultural thing, and that takes time to get to. And it takes the right people to do it day in and day out, not just once a year or 1 week out of the year. So that just tells you that it's a journey that you've got to constantly be moving at.
Just to plug our report one more time, there is another statistic. There is a statistic that says that over 60% of Canadian workers experience mental health issues in the workplace, but never discuss it because they don't feel the culture is opening and accepting. So if that's how current employees are feeling in the workplace, imagine the challenge of trying to bring someone in. So I think we have some work to do internally ourselves before we reach out.
Keep going back.
Can I just
Yeah,
add
please,
something?
please.
I think that, it still boils down, unfortunately, to attitude and stigma. I think that, even when people are doing the work that they are doing and perhaps even sounding good, quite frankly, often I like to sit there and kind of analyze what people have said. And, I find that still embedded in their thinking and their viewpoint is that disability is either a medical condition or they're hiring someone because it's a charitable act, I must say that before my life with the Canadian Labour Congress, I was doing a focus group, and it was with employers. It was an employer group, and one of the employees said to me, and this was because we were the focus group was on another group of, another population group. Anyway, but the employer said to me, and from the back, unfortunately, yeah, we're part of it because, it's part of our corporate social responsibility. But really, kind of get real, because, the supply end of it is that they're around the corner waiting to get a job with us. So, and that, to me, I was, kind of stunned that someone would just blurt it out like that. But anyway, but it just says to me that, it's small steps, but we also have to make sure that ourselves, our workplaces, our management, we have to take down that idea that it's either a medical/health issue or it's charity because, or it's because we need to do it. It's not. It's because it's a person who can offer labor that is of value to your business.
Thank you. So I think we have time for 2 more questions, and 2 people have mics in their hands, so go ahead. Up. So we have time for 1 more question, and 1 person has a mic. Actually, no, you need to use the mic so that we can record it. If you want to, I think it's up.
Is it up? Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, sorry about that. I apologize if this has already been covered. I was out of the room for a chunk working on something deadline sensitive. I've heard when I came in something about, all the something like 400,000 job vacancies that are available, but they're all in high tech, typically medical, health jobs that, and I don't want to sell anybody short, but I think there's a disconnect between thinking that those are going to be the jobs that many people with disabilities are going to get versus where they may actually be. So maybe someone can address that. And the second thing I wanted to ask or comment on was that employers have a predisposition not to hire people who've been unemployed for more than 6 or a year because they think it's a signal that they're not productive. And that often is where many people with disabilities find themselves. So how do we overcome that, even like as a general stigma? It affects more people than just people with disabilities, but we're unfortunately clumped in with it. How do we deal with that? Thank you.
Please.
Sure.
Thank you.
I know where you're coming from. So with TD, It is a struggle depending on the role. I do get some people who have very little experience at all. Maybe they've just come out of school or whatever their background is, and they're just looking for a job. And I'll be honest, what I usually say is go to our careers website to basically go exploring and see if you'd actually like to work for us at the bank. But then also get a taste of the rules. Every company is looking for efficiency, so some of the jobs that previously might have been roles, some have been automated, and it's a struggle. So then that's where somebody used to see it as an opportunity to come into the bank where then you can grow. Now they don't have that same one. It's kind of like the rungs of the ladder. Some of the lower ones have been removed. And that's really hard, so you're right. Then I was talking with the people at my table. I think some familiar faces are here. They say in art class, if I just give you a piece of paper and say to draw something, you're kind of stuck. But if I actually give you limitations, then you become creative. So I try to keep always a positive approach. I'm resilient or tenacious or just straight up stubborn. So with that, I'm thinking, okay, so can we see, are there opportunities for the co-ops, the internships? Perhaps what I'd love if there was a way down the road, and this is Jen, not TD speaking, I don't want to get in trouble, but if there is an opportunity where we could do basically 2-month trials, things like that, right? Or frankly, some of the jobs that, because we're looking for flexibility, I'll say on one thing, to hire for some of the junior roles, especially if they're back office, we're usually using a lot of contract companies. And there's an elaborate system for how all that works, and that's another conversation. But so some of those intro roles aren't as readily available. I always say if you're specifically looking to work in this area, it might be worth looking at a temp agency, a contract company, and then you can come in and get the experience. And then if a position does become available, you're already in, you've already been vetted, you've already got the skill set, so you have better chances of being hired. It is certainly a challenge, and it's frustrating to me personally. We're trying to do what we can in that regard. Volunteer work, yes, does help. I don't like the fact because you should be getting paid for the work you're doing. And part where because you had missed the first part, I'm with talent acquisition for TD. My entire portfolio is people with disabilities. So I actually meet candidates, whether in person, over the phone, or video. And I ask them about the resume so that I can help speak to their 6 months or a 2-year gap. Could be a back surgery, who knows? So that when I'm making a strong referral for them to a recruiter and then they ask about that, I can speak to it on their behalf and speak to their strengths. So because if somebody's doing what they can for their health or whatever the situation is, that shouldn't be deterring them, because some people, you're right, they do ask about the gap, but try to address that. You had a second part to your question.
I'm actually,
Yeah,
I
go.
think I'm going to,
Oh,
Can I,
Marcia,
can I just add one
you
thing?
can have a quick word, and then
Sometimes
we've
I
got
feel
one
like
last question.
Deja vu. You know, we're a great woman panel. We went through this. People tried to tell us to volunteer. There's all kinds of things we were told to do. We were told to be hairdressers. I think I would have been lousy at that job when I was told that by the employment agencies, but maybe I would have been good. But, you know, some of it sounds really similar. I don't think people should be given volunteer jobs. I think that's exploitative labor, and I think we need to be very careful that we're looking at serious, sustainable jobs. But we've been through that, and we rejected it all. We said, that's it. Now we just want to, don't send me to your women's department. I'm going to the main employment department. I'm not going to do volunteer work until you think you'd like to have me in your labor force. And yes, I'm going to have babies, which is just terrifying, just like somebody with a disability is terrifying. Having babies used to be the bane. That's what everybody told us about.
So we're going to do one very last question, and hopefully it'll be a nice short one, and with some and then we're going to close up.
Yeah.
Great, go ahead, Stephen.
All right. So first of all, thank you all. It was fantastic. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. So my question really surrounds, the panel's, mostly made up of larger employers. And as a frontline staff, I'm starting to see more of a trend towards larger employers seeing the benefits in hiring people with disabilities. However, a lot of the businesses that we work with are small businesses. So I'm wondering to what extent larger employers can help educate smaller employers of the benefits of hiring people with disabilities.
Role modeling. Does anybody want to take that?
So your question is, how can
I-
we?
I think if I can surmise, I think that, and this is a question that we often face at CCRW because we do work so often with small businesses. How can you role model the great work that you do as business leaders in inclusivity? How can you role model that so that that can benefit the smaller businesses when they're hiring people with disabilities as well, or having an inclusive workforce?
Go ahead, may I? Yeah. Like I said earlier, we collect data and stats on everything. And so when we show our numbers, our performance figures, especially at the business units that have a higher proportion of people with disabilities, I think that speaks volumes. And we're also finding, so yes, we're a big global organization, but we kind of operate like a small, medium-sized enterprise at the local level. And so some of our operators are very, very ingrained within the communities that they serve. And so that's how they can have an impact.
Really, really quickly, for us, if that company, say, goes to, obviously, everybody's got some kind of business banking account. If they go into their local branch and the person who's on staff has a disability and is supporting them, they're going, hey, actually, this is pretty cool. George H.W. Bush, who passed away recently, he had a quote, "It's hard to hate up close." So when you see that interaction, you're like, hey, actually, this is okay. And then you find out that person on the other side of the desk actually was really, really helpful. You lose some of the stigma.
Yeah. And then what we also find is that the other organizations that don't get it, we don't really want to do business with them. You know?
So on that, I want to thank you all very, very much. I think that this has been a wonderful panel, so we can have the best panel. Make sure you tell your friends.